And you know how Michael Jackson had the master at that, the late Bob Jones. He said to me one time, after he was out of the employ of Michael Jackson, he said, you know, the theory was, why stick with just one day of coverage? Because you media people, you'll lap it up. So we put out the hyperbaric chamber picture and let it sit there for a few days and fester and everybody picks it up. Then we issue a denial. Bingo, I've got 5 days worth of coverage because you guys will do that.
It's interesting that it was so calculated. Eric Deggans, television, of course, showing clips of him as a boy in the Jackson 5 days, and you know, in talking to just ordinary people, it's striking to me how many folks of a certain generation were touched by Michael Jackson's music. Have the media in this all of the excessive coverage that's coming out now, have they underestimated his importance in part as a racial trailblazer who was making music videos just when this was becoming popular in the 80s and a lot of the stars were white?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you know, one of the interesting things about Michael Jackson is, I mean, that's why we're talking about him. There's so many branches to this story. This is a man who had a hit in literally every decade that he was a performer. The 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, even to the turn of the new century. And the interesting thing about his emergence in the 80s, for example, was that he was one of the biggest artists after the disco boom to reunite white and black audiences, because the backlash against disco kind of, you know, separated white and black audiences into punk and disco. And all of a sudden he comes along and he forces MTV to start featuring black artists, and also brings these disparate audiences together. I was a pop music artist myself in the late 80s, and I can tell you, I was playing clubs in Kentucky and Tennessee and places that normally no black person could go without a bodyguard, but they loved us because they had been conditioned by Michael and later Janet to accept black artists.
If we have a couple extra minutes, we'll ask you to sing, Eric.
No, you don't want that. I'm a drummer.
Let me turn to Diane Diamond. Oh, you're a drummer. Okay. Is this now going to be the new Anna Nicole Smith case, where the media are going to spend days and weeks and months, who knows, reporting on the cause of death, the drugs, who gets custody of the 3 kids, what happens to the money? Is this just not going to go away?
Yes, and yes. You know what? Look, let's talk about the media. What part of the media? Newspapers, cable. That's their bread and butter. What's happening right now? So that's
let me just jump in. Let's put up some of those headlines. Okay, as you're talking, we're putting up some of the front pages to show this has been a big print story as well.
Exactly. I got a call from Maclean's magazine, the Canadian magazine, that said, help, quick, can we excerpt parts of your book, because we're going to do our whole issue. We've thrown it out, we're going to do the whole issue on Michael Jackson. So it depends on what media are you talking about. I'm sorry, I'm a long-time trained journalist, worked right there in Washington, D.C. at the White House in Capitol Hill, and when the evening newscast is 99% Michael Jackson. Now, I have trouble with that. Their reason for being is to tell me what's happening in the world, all over the world, capsulize it for me, not just give me one story. So I have a problem.
Go ahead, Carlos.
There are two big differences. There are two big differences in the Anna Nicole Smith case and Michael Jackson. I covered Anna Nicole from beginning to end, and I can cite these two big differences. With Anna Nicole, she died, and then you had a trial like 48 hours later. I mean, you know, because the big thing is, where are we going to bury her body? People forget that Anna Nicole Smith passed away, and then the big question was, we're going to bury her body,
and
who gets the baby?
Let's stick with Jackson.
So with Michael Jackson, there is not going to be a trial. I mean, there's not going to be a funeral. There'll be a funeral. There'll be a big funeral, but Anna Nicole Smith got the legs, excuse the pun, the legs of that story happened when that trial hit. And you had Sideshow Shitley, the judge crying and the whole thing.
Okay, let me just throw some numbers at you here for cable ratings on the Thursday night when we learned of the death. The CNN up 937% at one point, Fox up 243%, MSNBC up 330%. And the way that unfolded, Eric Deggans, is that the gossip site TMZ.com, which is part of Time Warner, confirmed an hour before everyone else that Jackson had died. CNN was still citing sources as saying she'd been in a coma, he'd been in a coma. The LA Times at first reported that he'd been in a coma. I mean, we now know he was dead when he got to the hospital. Let's look at Harvey Levin, the head of TMZ, talking about the way that coverage unfolded. Okay, I thought we had that clip, but what Levin said was that LA Times has not corrected the mistake, and that everybody was afraid to credit TMZ because it's seen as just a gossip site. The truth is, TMZ got it right, and the question is, do we treat it with enough respect?
Well, you know, TMZ is a site they've broken a lot of big stories. They broke Mel Gibson's profanity-laden drug driving arrest. They broke Michael Richards' use of the N-word. But they've also gotten some things wrong. I believe they reported that Snoop Dogg's wife was dead when she wasn't. So you've got to be careful about these stories. They got this one right. When they tell us how they got it right, then maybe we can put a little more trust in their reporting.
Does sometimes
one of the things we don't know, for example, is do they pay sources?
Well, no, actually, we do know that they do pay sources. They don't.
Well, there we go.
Sources, but
did they pay sources in this?
We don't know.
Did they pay sources in this case?
Let me come back to Carlos.
Can I also say? Can I also say one?
I got to go to Carlos. I got half a minute here. Diane mentioned the network newscasts, which led Thursday night, Friday night, of course, with Michael Jackson. Back in 1977, CBS led with another story, the Panama Canal, instead of Elvis's death. It just seems like everybody is on this Jackson bandwagon.
It's because people are. It's because people are talking about it. I mean, it's the old adage. Is that the standard?
Is that the media standard? Whatever people talk about, it becomes the most important story.
Yes, it is now. I mean, I'm not a 40-year veteran of TV journalism, but I can tell you that you cater to what everyone is talking about. That seems to be the new standard. And everyone on Thursday, everyone was talking about Michael Jackson's death. Farrah Fawcett died 5 hours earlier, and it's like as if she never even existed.
All right. Well, the question
is, that's the thing. But you're right.
We got to go. The question is whether we'll all be talking about this a week, 2 weeks from now, and if so, I may.
Yes, we will.
All right.
Yes, we will.
Eric Deggans, Carlos Diaz, Diane Diamond. Thanks for joining us.